The room had already decided who was right before Daniel Whitaker ever opened his mouth. 30 parents sat beneath the bright lights of the Westbrook Academy auditorium, watching as Claire Holloway placed a folder on the table and slowly turned toward the man standing beside his 10-year-old son. "I think we need to ask ourselves a difficult question," she said, her voice calm enough to sound reasonable. "Are we really going to let someone with no experience making these decisions influence how our children are raised?" A few people shifted in their seats. Others looked away. Daniel did not. He simply reached down and adjusted the loose strap on Noah's backpack, the same way he had done every morning for years, making sure the worn fabric would not pull against his son's shoulder. Noah noticed the movement. He always did. "Dad," the boy whispered, his voice barely carrying across the room. Daniel gave him a small nod, the kind that meant, "I am here." Claire looked at the gesture and mistook it for weakness. "This is exactly what I mean," she continued. "Being a loving parent is admirable, but love alone does not qualify someone to guide an entire community." The words landed harder than the room expected. Noah lowered his eyes toward the floor. He was old enough to understand when adults were talking about him, but still young enough to wonder if he had done something wrong. Daniel saw that question forming on his son's face. He did not look at Claire first. He looked at Noah. "Remember what we talked about," he said quietly. "People sometimes speak before they understand." That answer made several parents uncomfortable, not because it was angry, but because it was patient. Claire had expected an argument. She had expected embarrassment. She had expected Daniel to defend himself. Instead, he protected his son from feeling ashamed. "Mr. Whitaker," Claire said, stepping closer to the table, "this is not personal. We are discussing standards." Daniel glanced at the papers in front of her. He noticed something nobody else seemed to notice. The corners of the proposal were bent from being handled too many times. A handwritten note was sticking out from the side. Someone had crossed out a sentence and replaced it with a harsher one. Daniel quietly placed his hand over the paper and pushed it back toward her. "Before we decide what children need," he said, "maybe we should ask what they are actually experiencing." The room became still. Claire smiled slightly, the kind of smile people use when they believe they are about to teach someone a lesson. "And you believe you know that better than everyone here?" she asked. Daniel looked around the auditorium. At the parents. At the teachers. At his son sitting alone in the second row. Then he noticed an old framed photograph hanging near the entrance, one most people walked past without seeing. His expression changed for only a moment. A flicker of recognition. A clue hidden in plain sight. But before anyone could understand why that photograph mattered, Claire lifted her folder again and delivered the question that would change everything. "Then tell us, Mr. Whitaker," she said, "what exactly makes you think your opinion should carry any more weight than ours?" Daniel did not answer immediately. The question remained hanging above the room, heavier than anyone expected. For a moment, the only sound was the quiet hum of the auditorium lights and the soft tapping of Noah's shoe against the floor. Daniel had learned long ago that silence could reveal more than words. People rushed to fill empty spaces when they were uncomfortable. He waited. Claire noticed the pause and interpreted it as uncertainty. "I think that answers the question," she said, turning slightly toward the other parents. "Good intentions are important, but institutions cannot be built on feelings alone." Several people nodded. Daniel saw it happen, not because they were cruel, but because they trusted confidence. Confidence had a way of looking like truth. He looked back at Noah, who was carefully folding the corner of a worksheet in his lap. It was something he did whenever he felt overwhelmed. Daniel had noticed that habit years earlier, when Noah was 6 and afraid to raise his hand in class. Back then, Daniel had not given him a speech. He had simply sat beside him at the kitchen table and asked one question. "What would you say if your best friend felt the same way?" Noah had answered without hesitation. "I would tell him he is not invisible." Daniel never forgot those words. The meeting at Westbrook Academy was supposed to be about creating a better support program for students who struggled quietly. But somewhere between the first presentation and Claire's carefully prepared arguments, it had become something else. It had become a test of who people believed deserved to be heard. Daniel finally looked at Claire. "I do not think my opinion matters more than anyone else's," he said. "I think a child's voice should matter more than an adult's pride." The sentence changed the room in a way nobody expected. Claire's expression stayed controlled, but her fingers tightened around the folder. "That sounds inspiring," she replied. But inspiration does not replace qualifications. A teacher near the back lowered her eyes. She knew something the others did not. She had seen Daniel arrive at school early every Monday morning, not to speak at meetings, but to sit with students who ate breakfast alone before class started. She had wondered why someone with such patience spent his days doing quiet work nobody noticed. Now she wondered what else she did not know. Daniel picked up his son's forgotten pencil from the floor and placed it gently beside Noah's notebook. A small action, almost invisible, but it was exactly who he was. Claire noticed the framed photograph near the entrance again. Her eyes moved toward it for only a second before she looked away. Why had Daniel reacted when he saw it? Why did the oldest teacher in the room suddenly stop taking notes? Why did the school counselor quietly step outside after hearing Daniel's name? Noah looked up at his father, confused. He had always known Daniel was different, but never understood why adults sometimes changed their tone when they spoke to him. The meeting continued, but the atmosphere had shifted. Claire moved to the final page of her proposal, confident that the numbers would end the discussion. She placed the document on the table and pointed to one section. "This is the evidence," she said. "This is why experience matters." Daniel glanced down at the page. Then he saw the one detail that made his expression change completely. Not anger, not surprise, something closer to disappointment. Because hidden inside the proposal was a mistake that could affect hundreds of children. And Daniel knew exactly where that mistake came from. The mistake inside Claire Holloway's proposal was not a small formatting error. It was a decision that would quietly remove support from dozens of students who needed it most. Daniel recognized it because he had seen the same pattern before. A number on a page looked harmless until it became a child sitting alone in a hallway wondering why nobody noticed. Where did this information come from? Daniel asked. Claire looked surprised by the question. From the Academy's research committee, she replied. A committee you were not part of. The room became quiet again. Daniel looked at the document, then at the teachers sitting around the table. He knew exactly what would happen if he exposed the mistake immediately. He could prove he was right. He could embarrass Claire in front of everyone. He could finally make the people who doubted him understand. But then he looked at Noah. His son was watching carefully, learning from every choice his father made. Daniel slowly closed the folder. I would like to review this privately before anyone makes a decision, he said. Claire raised an eyebrow. You are asking us to delay a vote because you disagree? Daniel shook his head. I am asking us to delay a vote because children will live with the result. It was not the answer anyone expected. He had the chance to win the argument. Instead, he chose to protect the people affected by it. After the meeting ended, Daniel stayed behind while the other parents left. He collected the papers from the table and noticed a student name written in the corner of one page. He recognized it immediately, not because he knew the child personally, but because he remembered a note from a teacher 3 years earlier about a quiet boy who stopped participating after moving schools. Daniel had once spent months helping that student rebuild confidence. Claire noticed him staring at the page. You know that student? She asked. For the first time, her voice carried curiosity instead of judgment. Daniel placed the paper down. I know what it feels like when adults make decisions about children without hearing them first. Claire studied him. The man standing in front of her did not match the image she had created. She expected defensiveness. She expected excuses. Instead, she saw someone willing to accept being misunderstood if it meant protecting someone else. But her suspicion remained. Mr. Whitaker, I appreciate your concern, she said, gathering her documents. But I still need to understand something. Why does this matter so much to you? Daniel paused. The question reached closer to the truth than she realized. Before he could answer, the school counselor, Mrs. Evelyn Carter, stepped into the doorway holding an old file. Her expression was different now. She was not confused. She was not surprised. She looked like someone who had just confirmed a suspicion she had carried for years. Daniel, she said quietly, I thought that was you. Claire turned toward her. You know him? Mrs. Carter looked down at the file in her hands. I knew him before he became Noah's father. Daniel's eyes moved toward the folder. On the cover was a name Claire had never heard before, followed by a title that made her stop breathing for a moment. Daniel Whitaker, Child Advocacy Award recipient. The room that had once felt like a discussion suddenly felt like a courtroom. Daniel Whitaker stood beside the table while Claire Holloway held the file with his name written across the cover. The words Child Advocacy Award recipient had changed the way several people looked at him, but not everyone looked impressed. Some looked suspicious. Claire slowly closed the folder. "That explains the award," she said. "But it does not explain why you did not mention it." Daniel looked at her and answered simply, "Because it was not relevant." The response created a different kind of silence. Claire expected pride. She expected him to use the information as a shield. Instead, he treated it like something that belonged in the past. But before anyone could ask more questions, the school principal, Thomas Reed, entered the room carrying a printed email. His expression immediately changed the atmosphere. "We have a problem," he said. The parents who had started leaving turned around. Thomas placed the email on the table. It was from several members of the Academy board requesting that the proposal vote continue immediately. The reason was simple. A major donor had already approved funding based on Claire's program, and delaying the decision could risk losing the money. The room shifted again. Suddenly, Daniel was no longer just challenging an idea. He was standing between the school and a donation that many believed would help hundreds of students. Claire looked at him carefully. "This is the part you were not considering," she said. "Real decisions affect real people. We cannot always wait for perfect information." Daniel picked up the email and read every line. He noticed something unusual. The donor was never named directly. Only a foundation appeared on the paperwork. A foundation with a familiar abbreviation. Another detail nobody else seemed to notice. Daniel looked toward the principal. "Who approved this agreement?" Thomas hesitated for a moment. "The board reviewed it." "Who signed it?" Daniel asked. The hesitation lasted only 2 seconds, but it was enough. Claire noticed it too. "Why are you asking questions that sound like accusations?" she said. Daniel placed the paper back down. "I am not accusing anyone. I am trying to understand what happens if this decision hurts the same children we are claiming to protect." That answer frustrated Claire because it was impossible to attack. He was not fighting for himself. He was fighting for a possibility. But the pressure grew when another parent spoke from the back of the room. "Maybe Mr. Whitaker is right about some things, but maybe he also has personal reasons." Everyone turned. The parent continued, "His son is part of this school. How do we know he is not protecting his own interests?" Noah heard the words. His face changed immediately. Daniel saw it. This was the moment he feared most. Not being questioned himself. Watching his son believe that other people might see him as a problem. Daniel had a choice. He could reveal everything. He could explain his history, his work, his years helping families. He could make everyone understand. Instead, he walked toward Noah and sat beside him. He did not defend his reputation. He defended his son's sense of safety. Claire watched from across the room, and for the first time, doubt appeared in her expression. But then Thomas received a phone call. He answered quietly, listened for several seconds, and his face turned pale. When he ended the call, he looked directly at Daniel. "There is someone outside who says they know you," he said. "And they brought evidence that could change this entire meeting." The person waiting outside the auditorium was not a stranger to Daniel Whitaker. When the door opened, an older woman stepped inside carrying a thin blue folder pressed carefully against her chest. She looked around the room, then stopped when she saw Daniel sitting beside Noah. For a moment, her expression softened. "I was hoping I would find you here," she said. Claire Holloway watched closely. The woman did not look like someone arriving to make an accusation. She looked like someone carrying a memory. Daniel stood and greeted her quietly. "Mrs. Bennett." The name caught the attention of the teachers. Mrs. Evelyn Carter, the school counselor, recognized it immediately. She knew the name from old records. But Claire did not. "Who is she?" Claire asked. Daniel did not answer right away. Mrs. Bennett placed the blue folder on the table. "Before anyone makes another decision about this program, they need to see what happened the last time someone ignored the children who needed help." The room grew silent. Inside the folder were handwritten notes, old reports, and photographs from a community center that had closed years earlier. Claire looked through the first page and stopped. The documents were not about Daniel being important. They were about Daniel being present. Years ago, before anyone at Westbrook Academy knew his name, he had spent evenings helping families who had nowhere else to go. He had not been paid. He had not been recognized. He had simply shown up. But there was something else in the folder. A letter signed by Daniel. A promise he had made to a group of children after their support program lost funding. He promised they would not become invisible. Noah looked at his father. He had never seen this part of Daniel's life. "Dad, you did all that?" he asked softly. Daniel looked uncomfortable. Not because he was ashamed, Because he never wanted his son to believe kindness only mattered when people noticed it. Claire slowly turned the page. Her confidence weakened, but another question remained. If you knew this much about student support systems, why did you never speak during previous meetings? Daniel answered, because nobody asked the students what they needed. Everyone was too busy deciding for them. The response changed the room again. But then Thomas Reed pulled out another document from the blue folder. His face became serious. There is one more thing. He placed it on the table. It was not a recommendation. It was a warning from years earlier. A warning that the same funding structure being proposed today had failed before. Claire read the page twice. Her eyes moved faster the second time. The program she believed would transform the academy was built on a model that had already harmed students somewhere else. The question was no longer whether Daniel had experience. The question was why nobody had found this information before. Then Mrs. Bennett pointed to the bottom of the document. Look at the signature. Everyone followed her finger. Claire froze. The name there was connected to someone inside Westbrook Academy. Someone who had helped approve the current proposal. Someone who had a reason to keep the old failure hidden. Daniel looked toward the doorway as another figure appeared behind the glass. And when Claire saw who it was, she realized the truth was much larger than one mistaken judgment. The person standing behind the glass door was someone Claire Holloway recognized immediately. It was Martin Vale, a senior member of the Westbrook Academy board and the man who had personally praised her proposal during every private discussion. But the expression on his face was not the confidence of someone arriving to support her. It was the expression of someone who knew the room had already changed. Martin entered slowly and placed a small envelope beside the documents on the table. I think everyone deserves to see this before another decision is made, he said. Claire looked at him with confusion. Martin, what is this? He did not answer her directly. Instead, he looked at Daniel. You were right not to reveal everything. That sentence changed the way everyone saw the situation. The man Claire believed was simply challenging her proposal had been holding information that could have ended the argument hours earlier. But he had chosen restraint over victory. Martin opened the envelope and removed a copy of an old evaluation report. The same program model Claire wanted to introduce had been tested 7 years earlier at a different school district. The results were not a complete failure. In fact, the first months showed improvement. Then the problems appeared. The students who needed help most stopped participating because the program measured success through numbers instead of relationships. Daniel looked at the report quietly. He remembered those students. He remembered their names. He remembered the ones who stopped showing up because nobody asked why they were struggling. The room began connecting details that had seemed unrelated. The quiet comments Daniel made. The questions he asked. The reason he refused to embarrass Claire. The reason he cared more about the students than being proven correct. Claire slowly sat down. For the first time that evening, she was not defending herself. She was trying to understand. You knew this model before today, she said. Daniel nodded. Yes. And you still allowed me to present it? Her voice carried frustration, but also confusion. Daniel looked at the proposal on the table. I needed to know if people wanted a solution or just wanted to be right. Nobody responded, because everyone in the room knew the answer was uncomfortable. Then Martin placed another document beside the report. This one was different. It contained a recommendation letter from years earlier. A letter written by someone who had worked alongside Daniel during the most difficult period of his career. Claire read the first few lines and stopped. Wait, she whispered. You were offered a position with the state education department? Daniel did not respond. He simply looked at Noah, who was watching everything unfold. The truth was becoming clearer, but Daniel still refused to make himself the center of the room. That was what confused Claire most. Every person she had ever met with influence wanted to be recognized. Daniel seemed determined to disappear. Before anyone could ask another question, Thomas Reed's phone vibrated again. He checked the message, and the color left his face. There is another issue, he said. The board vote has already been scheduled for tomorrow morning. The room froze. Even with the evidence, even with the truth beginning to surface, the decision was still moving forward. Claire looked at Daniel. If you know this proposal could hurt students, why have you not stopped it yourself? Daniel reached into his old leather bag and pulled out a folded document he had carried for years. He placed it on the table, but kept his hand over the signature. Because stopping it requires something I have avoided for a long time. Everyone stared at the paper. What is that? Claire asked. Daniel slowly removed his hand. and the name written at the bottom was one nobody in the room expected to see. The document on the table was only one page, but it carried the weight of years of silence. Everyone looked at the signature at the bottom, waiting for Daniel Whitaker to finally explain why he had kept so much hidden. Claire Holloway leaned closer, expecting to find another title, another achievement, another reason to place him above everyone else in the room. Instead, she saw something unexpected. The signature belonged to Daniel himself, but not as an executive, not as an advisor, and not as someone seeking recognition. It was a resignation letter. 7 years earlier, Daniel had been offered a position leading a statewide child support initiative after his work with struggling families gained attention. The opportunity could have changed his life. It came with a larger salary, a public platform, and a level of influence most people would have accepted without hesitation. But he turned it down. The reason was written in one sentence at the bottom of the letter. I cannot build a system for children while forgetting the children standing in front of me. The room became quiet again, but this silence was different. It was not judgment. It was understanding. Claire looked at Daniel with a different question in her eyes. Not, who do you think you are? But why did you choose to stay unknown? Daniel folded the letter carefully and placed it back inside his bag. Because my son needed a father more than the world needed another person with a title. Noah looked up. He had heard his father say many things over the years, but he had never heard this part of the story. He looked around the room and realized something important. His father was not someone who failed to become important. His father was someone who chose what mattered more. But the moment of understanding did not last long. Martin Vale cleared his throat. There is still one problem, he said. Everyone turned toward him. The proposal was not created only by Claire. The board approved the structure because we believe the data supported it. He placed another document on the table. This one contained the names of every person involved in the approval process. Several people lowered their eyes. The consequences were no longer about one person making a mistake. They were about a group of people choosing speed over caution. Claire looked at the list and saw her own name near the top. For the first time, she felt the weight of what Daniel had been carrying all evening. She had walked into the room believing she was protecting children. Now she had to consider whether her confidence had prevented her from listening to them. But then Thomas Reed noticed something else. A missing page. The final evaluation from the previous program was not included in the original proposal package. Someone had removed the section that explained why the earlier model failed. The room changed instantly. This was no longer just a misunderstanding. Someone had decided that certain information should never be seen. Claire looked at Martin. Martin looked at Thomas. Thomas looked at Daniel. Everyone was searching for the same answer. Who had hidden the warning? Daniel remained silent, but his expression changed when he saw the missing page number. He recognized it, not because he had seen the report before, because he recognized the handwriting on the corner of the copied document. The same handwriting that had appeared years earlier on a letter he never expected to see again. Daniel slowly reached for the paper. His hand stopped halfway. Where did you get this copy? He asked. Thomas hesitated. It was sent anonymously this morning. Daniel looked at the envelope sitting beside the documents. A small return address was printed in the corner, and when he read the name attached to it, the one person connected to his past, he realized the final piece of the truth had just arrived. The envelope on the table had carried a name nobody expected to see. Daniel Whitaker stared at it for several seconds before finally opening it. Inside was not another accusation, not another report, but a letter from someone who had disappeared from his life years ago. The handwriting belonged to Sarah Mitchell, the former director of the community program, where Daniel had spent years working with children who needed someone to listen. She had been the person who first encouraged him to accept the statewide position he later declined. But she had also been the person who warned him about the danger of building systems without understanding the people inside them. Claire Holloway watched Daniel read the letter, and for the first time that evening, she saw something different in him. Not confidence, not pride, something closer to relief. The letter explained what had happened years earlier. Sarah had discovered that several education programs were being measured by numbers that looked successful on paper but ignored the students who quietly disappeared from the system. She had collected evidence, but before she could present it, leadership changes forced her out. The documents were buried. The same evaluation method had eventually reached Westbrook Academy. Daniel had not known the entire truth until that night. He had only recognized the warning signs. Thomas Reed read the letter aloud to the room. Every sentence changed the meaning of what people thought they understood. Daniel had not been hiding information to gain power. He had been protecting a promise he made years ago to children whose voices were ignored. Claire looked down at the proposal in front of her. The pages that had seemed like a solution now looked incomplete. She slowly removed her hand from the folder. "I thought I was fighting for them," she said quietly. Daniel looked at her. "I believe you did." That answer surprised her more than anger would have. She had expected him to make her feel guilty. Instead, he gave her the same patience he gave everyone else. Claire took a deep breath and stood. She turned toward the parents and teachers in the room. "I was wrong to assume confidence meant understanding," she said. "And I was wrong to judge someone before asking what he knew." Nobody interrupted. Nobody looked away. The apology was not perfect, but it was honest. Then Claire did something nobody expected. She walked to the table and removed her own signature from the approval page. This vote should not continue until every piece of information is reviewed. The decision changed everything. Martinvale followed by admitting that the board had moved too quickly because they were afraid of losing funding. Thomas agreed to pause the program review and reopen discussions with teachers, counselors, and students. But the most important moment happened away from the table. Noah walked toward his father after the room began to clear. He looked at the old letter still in Daniel's hand. "Why did you never tell me about any of this?" Daniel smiled slightly. "Because I never wanted you to think people matter only when they win awards." Noah looked around the emptying auditorium. The same room that had watched his father get questioned was now the same room where people finally understood him. Before they left, Claire approached Daniel one more time. She held the old photograph from the entrance, the one Daniel had noticed hours earlier. "I need to ask you something," she said. "Why did that picture matter to you?" Daniel looked at the photograph and became quiet. In the corner of the image was a young boy, standing beside a woman nobody in the room recognized. Claire noticed his expression change. "Daniel," she said softly, "who is she?" He looked at Noah, then back at the picture. And after years of keeping that part of his life private, he realized the final story he had never told was finally ready to be heard. 3 weeks after the meeting that changed everything, Westbrook Academy looked different, but not because of new signs or new programs. The change was quieter. The tables in the counseling office were no longer covered with unfinished paperwork. They were covered with handwritten notes from students, teachers, and parents who had finally been asked what they needed. Daniel Whitaker stood near the doorway one afternoon, watching Noah place a drawing on the wall beside dozens of others. It was a simple picture of a father and son sitting at a kitchen table. At the bottom, Noah had written one sentence: "The person who listens is the person who stays." Daniel smiled when he saw it, but he did not mention that he had kept the first drawing Noah ever made in a small box at home. Some things were too important to display. They were meant to be remembered. Claire Holloway visited the school several times after the meeting. She no longer arrived with a folder full of prepared answers. She arrived with questions. It was a small change, but everyone noticed. The same woman who once believed leadership meant having the strongest voice had learned that sometimes leadership meant making room for quieter ones. One afternoon, she found Daniel sitting with a group of students during lunch. He was not giving advice. He was not teaching a lesson. He was simply listening as they talked about worries adults often ignored. Claire stood nearby for a moment before speaking. "I understand now why you never showed anyone those awards." Daniel looked up. "What do you mean?" She pointed toward the framed photograph that had started so many questions. "Because you were never trying to prove you mattered." Daniel looked at the picture. It showed him years earlier beside Sarah Mitchell and a group of children from the community program. But there was one person in the photograph who mattered most. A young boy standing quietly in the corner. Noah recognized him immediately. "Dad, is that you?" he asked. Daniel nodded. The picture was taken on the first day he volunteered after losing his wife. He had been struggling to understand how to rebuild his life while raising a young child alone. Sarah had told him something that stayed with him forever. She said children do not need perfect parents. They need someone who keeps showing up. Daniel had spent years believing he was the one teaching that lesson to others. That day, he realized he had been learning it too. Claire looked at Noah and understood another piece of the story. The boy sitting beside Daniel during that difficult meeting was not just watching his father defend an idea. He was watching his father live by one. Later that evening, Daniel and Noah returned home. The apartment was quiet except for the sound of dinner cooking and the familiar movement of a family that had built its own traditions. Noah placed his school backpack by the door, then stopped. He looked at the old repaired strap Daniel had fixed months earlier. The same strap Daniel had adjusted during the meeting when everyone else was judging him. "You knew they might not believe you," Noah said. Daniel nodded. "Yes." "Then why did you stay calm?" Daniel sat beside him. "Because I wanted you to remember what you do matters more than what people think about you at first." Noah thought about that for a moment. Then he leaned against his father, the way he had done when he was younger. The world had finally seen Daniel clearly, but Daniel had never needed the world to tell him who he was. He already knew. He was a father who showed up, a man who chose kindness when pride would have been easier, and a person who proved that the quietest voice in the room can sometimes leave the deepest mark. Thank you for watching until the end of the video.